Удобные исторические теории. Простые, стройные, известные каждому со школы. Будут опровергнуты. Забытая история.
3:06 p.m. local time. Radio station Moscow is speaking at 94.8 FM. Olga Baikalova in the studio. This is the program Forgotten History. Today we will talk about the end of the world in the world mythology. In our studio, we have Gleb Nosovsky, an associate professor of the Faculty of Mechanics and Mathematics of Moscow State University, and co-author of the concept, The New Chronology. Gleb Vladimirovich, good afternoon.
Hello.
Let's remind everyone of our contacts.
All right, although this has nothing to do with mythology.
Today, we will still talk about the end of the world. The topic is endlessly fascinating. There will be many questions. To start with, let's understand what we mean by the end of the world.
The end of the world is a theory, an idea that has more to do with chronology and church tradition than mythology. It also relates to the new chronology because it's one of the most important concepts in chronology and in understanding our past. This includes the anticipation of the end of the world, the calculation of the end of the world, the origin of the idea of the end of the world, and how it has been perceived in human understanding, imagination, and science. Up until the 18th century, calculating the end of the world was a part of academic science.
It is science.
Yes, back then. Of course, now it is no longer considered science. But until the 18th century, it was considered part of science, and quite academic scientists, even in the 18th century during Newton's time, were carrying out these calculations. By the way, Newton himself was interested in this.
You mentioned that the concept of the end of the world is more related to church tradition. But what about, for example, the Maya tribes and other primitive tribes that also believed in something similar?
I'll talk about the end of the world according to the Maya calendar supposedly in 2012 at the end. It is indeed a very interesting topic, but more on that later. Because right now it would be unclear.
Alright, we'll definitely discuss that. Then it will be clear from the logic of this broadcast what we are talking about. Good. The idea of the end of the world has quite profoundly permeated human history for a long time. Let's then delve deeper into the Christian tradition. What is the core idea?
Not a long time, but throughout our entire written history. Let me remind you that according to the new chronology, the written history of humanity begins with the era of Christ. Written history is the history from which written sources have reached us that we can read. According to the usual, well-known, and widely accepted chronology today, if we mentally survey the entire chronology as proposed by historians, supposedly from 5000 to 4000 BC, where the pyramids in Egypt are, the era of Christ is closer to us. Up to our time, the year 2000 AD, it's approximately a 7,000-year period, in which the era of Christ is 2,000 years ago, so it's closer to us than to the beginning of this period. In the new chronology, the written history of humanity starts from the era of Christ. Essentially, according to the new chronology, we know nothing or very vaguely about events before the era of Christ. That is the ancient pre-written history. Pre-written not in the sense that people could not write back then, but in the sense that those written sources have not reached us, that writing has been lost, and so on. Of course, we can view written history not from the moment writing was invented, which happened quite a long time ago, but from the moment when written sources became more stable and reached us, or we reached them, so to speak. Therefore, according to the new chronology, all our written history is Christian history. This must be understood. In this sense, although the new chronology rejuvenates the era of Christ in the absolute sense, bringing it more than 1,000 years closer to us, in the relative sense, it makes it more ancient. That is, relative to all other events, it makes the era of Christ more ancient, and this era becomes the oldest in our history. The idea of the end of the world dates back to the very beginning of Christianity and indeed permeates our entire culture. I will later share some thoughts and hypotheses on where this idea came from. But for now, let's not focus on that. The idea emerged, and it is known that it originated from somewhere, with Christians asserting from the start that the world is finite. Incidentally, it's interesting to consider that such an idea is quite intriguing, and it would have been strange for people to arrive at such a conclusion out of nowhere. Nevertheless, they did. For some reason, they came to the idea that the world is finite, that times are finite, and that everything will eventually end. From the very beginning, since the era of Christ, the Christian Church has discussed when this would happen. We've talked about the end of the world. Now let's turn to chronology, and then these two threads will merge. Chronology is the calculation of time in the past, the recording of ancient and not only ancient but also modern events in time. However, it turns out that recording contemporary events and recording ancient events in time are significantly different things. If we turn to ancient times, we will see that chronological systems and methods of dating have been changing.
When we talk about ancient times, our listeners need to understand which specific centuries we mean.
Let's not clarify that for now.
All right.
Because ancient times are ancient times both in the conventional chronology and in our chronology. Yes, in absolute terms, they are at different points in time from us. But intuitively, we understand what ancient times are, and the intuitive concept of ancient times is the same in both the new chronology and the conventional chronology. So, let's not specify for now. I will clarify over time.
Let's try. All right.
Let me repeat once more what I started with. The era of Christ is the beginning of our written history. The era of Christ is the 12th century AD, which occurred approximately 800 to 900 years ago. This is the starting point of our written history. But according to the new chronology, ancient times ended even later. In general, ancient times, both according to the new chronology and Scaliger's chronology, refer to the era before the adoption of Christianity. This is usually considered the case. Antiquity, the ancient period before the adoption of Christianity, after which the Christian Middle Ages begin.
Egypt, the Maya, the Aztecs.
Let's set aside America for now.
All right, let's set it aside.
Let's not get too scattered, right?
Okay, I won't interrupt you anymore.
Let's talk about Europe, to avoid mixing everything together. What are ancient times in Europe? It's antiquity, various Bacchic cults, ancient Rome, and so on. Then, after the adoption of Christianity, all this transitions into the Christian era. This happens similarly in both the new and the old chronologies. Simply the transition point is different. In the Scaliger-Petavius chronology, it's the 4th century AD, about 1600 years ago. In the new chronology, it's the 14th century AD, about 600 years ago. That's the only difference. But for now, let's discuss qualitative evaluation, ancient times or early Christianity. In fact, the idea of the end of the world hasn't undergone significant changes from ancient times, through early Christianity, and even up to the 18th century. It existed and still exists, though no longer within science, whereas it used to be part of science. Let's talk about something else, chronology. I want to return to chronology and then we will bring everything together. How did ancient people measure time? It is known that the simplest method was by the years of the reigning ruler. For example, the nth year of such and such emperor, the nth year of such and such ruler. In Japan, by the way, they still count time this way. If you go to some remote place in Japan, a person might not even know that it's 2015. They know the year based on the reign of the current Japanese emperor. This is documented everywhere there. They know these years better than the common calendar we use. It has always been that way there. In Japan, this system is preserved. We had this system too. If you remember, in the Gospels, the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. This is the only date mentioned in the Gospels. It's indicated by the year of the reigning emperor. This is a natural system of timekeeping. I want to point out that I will now be discussing the common and public timekeeping systems, not the ones used in scientific works. Because in scientific works, among astronomers and specialists, they had other systems.
That is, we won't use a star map to navigate?
No. One thing is what they're discussing in the Academy of Sciences today, and another thing is what they're discussing on the streets. These are slightly different topics, different things. Right now, we're going to talk about what's happening on the streets.
But in your analogies, you rely on what's happening.
I'm going to talk about the commonly used calendar. Because what calendar was used by scientists, astronomers, and so on, is a different issue. They had different systems.
Was the concept of the end of the world considered scientific back then?
Back then, the concept of the end of the world was considered scientific. But because scientists knew more, they knew how to deal with large numbers. They dealt with calculations. From the very beginning, even from the time of the Almagest, they used other, more advanced methods of reckoning time, which society reached later. Initially, simpler methods of reckoning time were used in society, namely by the years of an emperor's reign. And this satisfied everyone for quite a long time, until people started delving into history and chronology. And they discovered that it's very difficult to understand old sources where the years of reign are given according to certain emperors. Because to do that, you need to know when that emperor ruled, paced his reign, and place his reign on a temporal axis. This couldn't always be done just by looking at old sources. Therefore, even in ancient times, scientists introduced what's called the indiction chronology, according to which the year was counted not with 1, but with 3 digits. There were 3 cyclical counters: lunar cycle, solar cycle, and indiction. Lunar cycle ranged from 1 to 19, solar cycle from 1 to 28, and indiction from 1 to 15. Each year, all these counters simultaneously increased by 1 and cyclically reset. That is, when lunar cycle reached 19, the next value was 1. When solar cycle reached 28, the next value was 1. When indiction reached 15, the next value was 1. The trio of such cyclical counters allowed determining the current year very reliably, expressing it with small numbers. Because in ancient times people did not study in school, and large numbers were considered a kind of high science that they simply didn't understand. This method of reckoning time allowed society to denote years in a language it understood very reliably. Moreover, it is very stable, because if some digit got erased, say, in indiction, then with the help of the other two counters, one could understand which year it was. Provided that we know it's a modern date from my lifetime or my parents' lifetime. If a person knew that it pertained to their time, they could reconstruct the year. All this lasted for quite some time, and not just some time. If we take, for example, Russian chronicles and sources, we will see that remnants of indiction dates were still used in the 17th century. Even in the 17th century, when dating, although they no longer always indicated lunar and solar cycles, they still specified indictions for quite a while.
Who was the first to introduce the indiction system?
This is unknown.
This is unknown.
That's what I'm saying, it's an ancient method of time reckoning. It gets lost in the ages. In our new chronology, we have some ideas about when this all happened, but I don't want to delve into that now. It's considered unknown when it happened. There are various theories about this, but there is no precise knowledge.
So, we don't know who, but we know the indiction system, and it's somehow connected to the end of the world.
Directly.
Alright, let's continue.
I want to emphasize once again that although indiction dates were abandoned, they were abandoned not so long ago. Because even in the early 17th century, manuscripts were filled with remnants of indiction dates that were transcribed following tradition. In fact, indiction itself was only abandoned in the 18th century. It was still indicated in books in the 17th century. Solar and lunar cycles were abandoned a bit earlier. So, why didn't the indiction system with 3 counters suit people? It became unsuitable when people started engaging in chronology. Let's not talk about when exactly this happened. At some point, people started engaging in chronology and began to look at these dates not in contemporary sources but in old ones. And what happens? This indiction system is triple resistant for contemporary times. That is, if there's an error somewhere, the other 2 numbers will make up for it.
Well, yes, the most stable figure is a triangle.
No, the triangle has nothing to do with it. It's about triple stability. 3 numbers fix the same year. These numbers, 15, 19, and 28, are coprime. From a mathematical standpoint, this means that these 3 cyclical counters will repeat their trio of values only after the product of these numbers. You can easily multiply 15 by 19 by 28, and you get about 8,000. It's 7,900 something. Well, almost 8,000.
So, when we come to the same value from which we started,
the entire trio, the number of years equal to 15 multiplied by 19 multiplied by 28 must pass. I don't remember exactly, but it's 7,900 something.
And, accordingly, this number would be the end of the world?
No.
Okay, I am tangled up.
Well, now we will untangle you.
Alright.
Although your idea is correct, but not entirely.
Well, go ahead.
If we look at this trio in an old source, an error in one value, say, if indiction is off by 1, shifts the date by the product of the other 2 numbers. 19 times 28 equals 532. Because of an error of 1, the date went 532 years off. An error of 2 in indiction shifts it by more than 1,000 years. An error of 1 in solar cycle means 15 times 19, which is about 300 years. Hundreds of years. Errors arise when we don't know to which era this date belongs. That is, if we just want to calculate by some trio. Moreover, if we take two such trios from old sources, just looking at them, it's not clear which date is earlier and which is later. There are two trios of numbers. By looking at them, it's unclear, one must do calculations. And these are iterative calculations, you can't write a formula. Today, it's easy to do with a calculator. Back then, when they wrote with sticks and goose quills, and not everyone could.
It was difficult to do?
It was difficult to do.
Accordingly, they made mistakes.
Accordingly, they made mistakes. When people started trying to reconstruct chronology based on indiction dates, they ended up in complete chaos. Then people first realized that in public time reckoning, they had to act the same way scientists had long been acting. That is, to count years by eras. This is what we have long since adopted and what seems natural to us today. A starting point is taken, usually from ancient times. It is said that at some point in ancient times, a great event occurred, and we are now so many years from that date. All eras were introduced in this way, and from then on, we start counting. We carry forward these initial digits. Today, we carry forward 2000 and will continue to carry 2000 for a long time. 2000, 2000, 2000. We constantly repeat them, thereby providing stability to our dates. Because we repeat the same thing. When counting by era, only the lower digits change over the years, which can only slightly shift the number.
Gleb Vladimirovich, may I ask a clarifying question? According to the indiction system, what year is it now?
I can tell you how to calculate it. You need to add 5,508 to 2015. From the resulting number, take the remainder when it is divided by 15, by 19, and by 28.
So, we take the resulting number and first divide it by 15.
By 15 and take the remainder.
The remainder.
So, if it divides by 15, it will be 1 since there is no 0. If it divides by 15 with a remainder of 1, then plus 1.
2.
If it divides exactly by 15, that's 1. If with a remainder of 1, that's 2. And so on.
So, I take this remainder and first divide it by 15, then by 19, then by 28.
This sum, 2015 plus 5,508, we divide by 19, 15, and 28 and take the remainder.
Take the remainder, and this remainder is.
And add 1 to the remainder.
And add 1 to it.
Because the remainder when dividing by 15 ranges from 0 to 14, and we need from 1 to 15. The remainder when dividing by 19 ranges from 0 to 18, and we need from 1 to 19. So, take the remainder, add 1 to it, and get 3 numbers. Calculate and you'll get it.
We get 3 numbers. Now all our radio listeners are puzzled and actively calculating. Friends, add 5,508 to 2015. First divide by 19, by 15, by 28. Take the remainder and add 1.
Sorry, just a bit more clarification. Since it's now from September to December, you need to add 5,509.
While you're calculating, we'll listen to news.
Because the January year starts in January, but the indiction year starts in September, so 5,509.
Gleb Vladimirovich, while the listeners and I are calculating what year it is now according to the indiction system, let's listen to news and then come back.
Говорит Москва. Забытая история.
This is Forgotten History, 3:36 p.m. local time. Radio station, Moscow is speaking, at 94.8 FM. Olga Baikalova reminds you of the program, Forgotten History. Our guest is the Associate Professor of the Faculty of Mechanics and Mathematics of Moscow State University, co-author of the concept, The New Chronology, Gleb Nosovsky. Gleb Vladimirovich, we calculated it. During news, Gleb Vladimirovich and I calculated it, and we got 10, 1, 21.
Yes, because there was no concept of 0, and 1 had to be added.
Add 1 as the start of the count?
The smallest number at that time was 1.
There was no 0. It appeared later.
So, it is now the year 10, 1, 21. What does this tell us, and how can we calculate the end of the world with this information?
Look, it's now the year 10, 1, 21. Suppose there's another year, say 12, 2, 20. Without calculation, we can't even compare these years.
We don't know if the second year was earlier or later than the first. When did it occur?
What is the time span between them? All this requires calculations, and iterative ones at that, which were very difficult for that time. In this sense, the indiction system of reckoning time is very good and stable for current use, but it was completely unsuitable for establishing chronology in the past.
People immediately got confused with these dates when they took them from old sources. As a result, they realized that they had to switch to era-based time reckoning, which was already accepted in scholarly works. But at that time, people hadn't used it yet.
In time reckoning, albeit with moans and groans, they eventually decided to switch to larger numbers.
What did they do? They calculated when there was a year when all 3 counters were equal to 1.
The fact is, this was already steeped in tradition and considered divine.
These 3 counters, for various reasons, were considered divine, sacred, and so on.
All this was within the framework of the Church.
But people forgot that they were introduced at different times and for different reasons.
Even their beginnings were different: March, October, September. All this was forgotten, and by that time people considered them sacred. They decided to calculate when this wonderful year was, when all 3 counters were equal to 1. They performed this calculation.
And now I will say when it was.
According to the new chronology, it was approximately in the era of the adoption of Christianity.
It was probably related to the adoption of Christianity, when the Christian Church became state-supported and not persecuted.
Was it the year 111?
No. When it became state-supported and not persecuted. When Christian bishops received state positions and engaged in such calculations. It turned out that the year 111 was approximately 6,900 years in the past from their time.
They designated this year, 111, as the year of the creation of the world, when the Lord created the world, when all 3 counters were equal to 1.
So, approximately 6,900 years ago.
Yes, approximately 6,900 years ago.
What is the trick of this situation?
The trick is that the date turned out to be close to 7,000. Not 7,000, but close, however not very close. About 100 years. A human lifetime is not enough to live through it. Soon, but I won't live to see it.
A very tricky situation.
Then scholasticism took over. On one hand, according to the Apostle Peter,
1 day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as 1 day. This is a very famous expression by the Apostle Peter.
On the other hand, God created the world in 7 days.
At that time, people believed that there was something divine in numbers, that numbers themselves were divine, and that the beauty of these calculations was divine.
From this, they concluded that since the Lord created the world in 7 days, it would also last 7 Lord's days.
The Apostle Peter said, "One day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day."
Therefore, 7,000 years are 7 Lord's days. In the end, they concluded that the end of the world would come in the year 7,000 from the date they calculated. And these 7,000 years were just around the corner, approximately in 100 years.
I see.
This calculation so astonished society that it was accepted by everyone. It wasn't just the opinion of some church members. It was the opinion of the church, the authorities, the scientific community, and the entire educated society of that time. As we now understand, according to the new chronology, this calculation was made approximately at the end of the 14th century, which is the era of the adoption of Christianity.
And that's how the year 1492 came about?
Yes, that's how they came up with the year 1492, though they didn't call it that. They called it the year 7000. The entire 15th century was marked by the fear of this anticipated event.
Calendars and Paschal tables weren't made for dates beyond that year.
The church published calendars only up to that point. After that, it was the end of the world. This was a completely accepted, scientific, and church-sanctioned opinion, endorsed by all ecclesiastical and secular authorities. Again, what's the tricky part? The trick is that the people who made this calculation, being church figures, decided to use it to correct people's behavior. They said, "You see, the end of the world is near. Be better, behave better."
Fear is the best motivator.
They believed it was salutary. They didn't realize the bomb they were planting.
They themselves didn't live to see it.
They were already older adults. Clearly, they wouldn't live another 100 years. And when they died, their children and grandchildren considered them classics and believed it unconditionally.
So, no one allowed for the possibility of a mistake?
No one allowed it.
Understood.
So, what happened?
There were very sharp changes, wars, for example.
What was happening in the 15th century?
Before the year 7000, that is, 1492, people were preparing for the end of the world. There were mass suicides.
People gave away their property and all their money. And this happened not only here but throughout Europe. Which immediately raises questions. If we now look at the modern version of history, we see that according to this chronology, the year 7000 in 1492 was only recognized by us and Byzantium.
The creation era of Constantinople.
But Europeans, as we are told now, used entirely different eras of creation.
Why did they have such hysteria? Historians try to explain that, sure, they used different eras, but they panicked according to ours.
Interesting.
You see the explanations?
Awkward explanations, to put it mildly. According to our calculations, the Book of Revelation was written precisely in the 15th century, 6 years before the end of the world, in 1486. Dante's Divine Comedy was written 15 years before that date.
So, these are all examples of mass hysteria?
Yes, and it was escalating.
The Divine Comedy, the Book of Revelation, these are already at the peak of it, more calmly in the last surahs of the Quran.
The Quran was also written at that time, according to the new chronology, because Muhammad and the Ottoman conquest are merged in the new chronology and placed in the 15th century. By the way, there is a group of translators who are working on translating the Quran. If the Quran is translated correctly, if the Arabic text is interpreted correctly, at least the last surahs, they haven't done the first ones yet, it will turn out that the last surahs, from about the 70th to the 100th, are exclusively about the anticipation of the end of the world, although in calmer tones because this is still the time of the founding of Kazan by Muhammad in 1438, according to the new chronology. It's in a calmer tone. They still had about 60 years. But nevertheless, it is about the constant discussion of the end of the world. This can be seen in modern translations of the Quran too, but they are so distorted that it's hard to notice. But still, if you read, you can see it even there.
So, it turns out that all these texts appear not as prophetic, but they appear based on the fact that people knew and were expecting the end of the world.
Yes, they knew and were absolutely certain that the end of the world would be in the year 7000.
Then the question immediately arises, what happened after 1492, when this date passed?
In the corridors of power, there was confusion and a very strong sense of bitterness. Special councils were convened to decide what to do. The bitterness was among those who had given away all their estates and property. Imagine a wealthy person giving away all their money and waiting for the end of the world, only for it not to come.
And how was it explained that it didn't come?
This is the next stage one want to move on to now. How was it explained that it didn't come?
For example, in Russia, it was explained that the Gospels say not to try to calculate it.
So, the calculations were in vain, done incorrectly.
But this answer didn't satisfy many. In reality, the year 7000 is a point of divergence for all world religions.
That specific point?
That specific point.
By the way, if I'm not mistaken, it was around that time in Russia that they started using a new calendar system instead of the Constantinople calendar.
That's what historians say. They got everything mixed up.
Alright, historians got everything mixed up.
Their dates are wrong. I want to tell you how it was according to our calculations and our reconstruction. What did people start doing? In their confusion, they began looking for the mistake. Many new religious movements emerged.
Some extreme movements said, "We were deceived. The whole church is wrong and Christ is wrong.
He is yet to come. Let's recalculate. Overall, they still adhered to the idea of the year 7000, but said that the calculation of the creation of the world was wrong.
They recalculated it and came up with a new creation, which pushed the end of the world back by 1,000 or 2,000 years.
For example, Jewish and Protestant calendars. They also have a creation date. According to all these creations, the year 7000 has not yet come. It is still 1,000 or 2,000 years away.
Do I understand correctly that no matter which concept we take, which calendar system we use, they all are based on the idea that there is a moment of the creation of the world, and after 7,000 years, there will be the end of the world?
Back then, they thought so, though many have forgotten this today. But in the year 7000, they relied on this idea. Many religious movements arose, including Judaism and Protestantism, which emerged around the same time.
They calculated the moment of the creation differently and, accordingly, the end of the world differently.
Notice that for all of them, the end of the world and the creation were significantly pushed forward and only forward, by 1,000 or 2,000 years.
Moving the dates backward was pointless, since it had not occurred in the past, so it had to be in the future.
At that time, the founders of these religious movements were confident and adhered to the concept that the end of the world would indeed come in the year 7000. It was just calculated incorrectly.
It just ought to be recalculated.
They did so by shifting these cycles. If the start of one cycle is shifted, then all three ones immediately move.
Thus, we ended up with a cascade of dates in the Middle Ages.
As a result, it was precisely then that many existing eras from the creation of the world emerged.
When we talk about creation eras, there are two types. One is the functioning eras used by people, such as in Protestant and Jewish churches. The other is the so-called book creation eras, where historians open a book and say, "See, the author of this book used this creation era." This is pure trickery.
It usually involves an ancient author writing the date of Christ's birth, which ancient authors also calculated differently.
Modern historians claim that all the ancient authors calculated the date of Christ's birth correctly, exactly as it is considered today. And since they have different dates, it means they just calculated the creation date differently. Sometimes one author will have three different creation dates.
They calculated in such a way that ended up with three different creations of the world. This is pure manipulation, the trickery of historians who, trying to convince us that no one doubted the date of Christ's birth, moved the creation date.
These are the so-called scholastic, Buxi dates.
Gleb Vladimirovich, from the perspective of the new chronology, when exactly was the world created? We'd like to understand when we can expect the end of the world according to the new chronology. We don't have much broadcast time left, but this is a pressing question that interests everyone.
The new chronology does not deal with the doomsday calculation.
But does the new chronology know when the creation of the world actually took place? From there, we can calculate it ourselves by simply adding 7,000 years.
No, the new chronology does not deal with calculating the creation dates either. Nevertheless, the question of what the ancients understood by this is interesting.
I'll say a few words on this topic, although it's just a hypothesis. First, I'll answer some listeners' questions about what the end of the world is.
Yes, how did people back then imagine the end of the world?
It's described in many books, and the description goes like this. From the east, a river of fire will flow, the seas will boil, and the mountains will be erased from the face of the earth. There's a lot written about this in the Quran and in Christian church sources.
They write the same thing. A wall of fire from the east, the seas will boil, the mountains will collapse, the earth will become smooth and renewed. Absolutely everything will burn, and every person will acquire a new body at about the age of 30. That is, all our bodies will burn, both the living and the dead, as well as the unborn.
All people, the dead, the living, those in the womb, will acquire a new body at the age of 30 and will go to the last judgment.
After this, on this burnt, renewed earth, the last judgment will begin, and everyone will be assigned to either heaven or hell. Such a theory, such an idea, such a description can be found in many books. It must be said that it's an interesting theory.
First of all, it is interesting. Why 30 years old?
30 years is considered the age of Christ.
I see.
That's most likely where it comes from.
The last judgment comes from there. But why will everything burn, a wall of fire, and the seas boil?
Actually, this is interesting.
I want to make a hypothesis.
How much time do I have?
Maybe I can do it in 2 minutes.
We have time.
Here's the thing.
In the past 20 years or so, science has been grappling with the problem of the year 535 AD. In the Arctic and Antarctica, ice cores are taken, which show annual layers that go quite deep. It was discovered that in 535 AD, both at the North Pole and the South Pole, there is a significant amount of sulfur and traces of a volcanic eruption in the ice layers. Additionally, scientists have found the same evidence in the rings of common juniper growing in circumpolar areas. The common juniper is a small tree or shrub that grows in permafrost and is unaffected by any nuclear or volcanic winters. It grows very slowly, living for over 1,000 years, and its rings also show traces of something happening in 535 AD. If a volcano was powerful enough to affect both the North and South Poles simultaneously, it must have been a very large volcano. Let me give you an idea of what a large volcano is.
What kind of volcano was this?
Until recently, it was unclear what kind of volcano it was.
Let me explain what a major volcanic eruption entails. It's not what we're used to. A major volcanic eruption involves a crater whose area is approximately equal to the area of Moscow, or it may be larger or smaller. Such a crater ejects a column of ash up to 100 kilometers high. Such an eruption leads to a volcanic winter lasting 10 to 15 years. Depending on where the volcano erupts, for example, in Indonesia, a layer of ash up to 10 meters thick can cover everything up to India. The temperature drops across the planet, all living things die, there are sulfuric rains, and so on. This lasts for 10 to 15 years.
So, basically, something happened in 535 AD, but it's not recorded in written sources.
Naturally, historians will find something. Procopius of Caesarea said, "It's a bit colder today." They will always find something. Or an ancient Chinese chronicler said, "This winter is very cold."
So, what is the mystery of the year 535?
You should understand that an eruption of this scale and a 15-year volcanic winter would be unbearable even for modern civilization, let alone the civilization of that time.
Imagine 15 years of winter and sulfuric rains today. Do you know what would be left of our current civilization? Not much, if anything.
And in the Middle Ages, the 6th century was the height of the Byzantine Empire, the time of Justinian.
If such a major eruption had occurred, none of that could have existed. I want to mention that a crater with a diameter of 50 kilometers was found not long ago. This is the so-called Proto-Krakatoa. Most people are familiar with Krakatoa, a major volcano that erupted in the 19th century. That was a very large eruption. Krakatoa is just a small spot on the perimeter of this huge crater.
Where is it located?
Proto-Krakatoa is now underwater.
That's why it was hard to find for so long. It fits all the parameters. Scientists are working on this, and there's a hypothesis that Proto-Krakatoa erupted in 535 AD.
If that's true, it pulls the plug on all our history, axes the traditional version of history altogether.
Why?
I repeat, an eruption of this magnitude destroys any medieval civilization and even a modern one.
So, if this eruption happened in 535 AD, it means that all living things, if they existed on the planet, were wiped out.
Only a few would have survived.
But since humanity survived, it means there was no such eruption.
It's clear that humanity survived, but civilization couldn't have, and written sources couldn't have survived either.
That's why there aren't any.
So, if everything started from 535 AD, then the new chronology shows how far back we can reach.
It's such an interesting topic. but unfortunately, we're out of time. We've only just touched upon it, and our program is over. Gleb Vladimirovich, I suggest we continue this topic next Saturday.
Next Saturday, I can answer questions.
We'll definitely do that. Unfortunately, our broadcast has come to an end. Associate Professor of the Faculty of Mechanics and Mathematics of Moscow State University, and co-author of the concept The New Chronology, Gleb Nosovsky, was with us in the studio today. Gleb Vladimirovich, thank you very much for an interesting discussion.
Thank you.